what you think the future of youth sport.
I honestly thought that that's what I was going to end up doing for a living for the rest of my life, was playing baseball.
What did you see, and what are you seeing now that are opportunities or things, broken that still, are going to take time to fix?
What we found in this, and what I originally saw, was in most other sports, there's very measurable aspects of things. We were talking about baseball in background. Everything is measured. In football, everything is measured. In basketball, everything is measured.
Today, I'm joined by Keith English, an entrepreneur and operator whose career has crossed software, healthcare scheduling, and now youth sports, which is actually where he began, and we'll go into that in a second. Publicly, he's been tied to companies like LeadRev and Local Med, and today he's involved and leading SkillMasters and Snap Soccer, where the focus is on player assessment, development, and tournament operations. And I think what makes Keith especially interesting is that he brings a systems builder mindset into a space and industry that many of we know here is often driven by subjectivity, sometimes by reputation, and even by uneven access. Not every athlete has the same opportunities. So today I thought we'd talk not only about his journey, but also what happens when data, development, and performance start to reshape youth sports. And to kick it off, I thought I might ask, just Keith, if you wouldn't mind, share a little bit about your early journey and career, and what's brought you to before you've now returned to the sports industry.
Sure. So I grew up playing baseball, played soccer when I was real young, but by the time I was 10, I was definitely not good enough to continue with that. And I honestly thought that that's what I was going to end up doing for a living for the rest of my life, was playing baseball. Finally, after a couple of years, I played through college and a couple of years professionally, and then was told that my services were no longer required, and kind of cast about from there. Ended up moving down here to Pensacola, Florida, which is where my grandparents were. So that was just a good place to go. Struggled around for a little while to kind of find my footing business-wise, started a few things that didn't go very well, and finally kind of struck on one that I was able to build, which was in the lead generation space. Was able to build that company up and sold that in 2008. Dealt with a lot of financial institutions, things of that nature, and connecting customers and the financial institutions together. After I sold that business, I went fishing for about 4 years. So I traveled around with my family, exploring the big world that we live in, and seeing some things that I wanted to see, and then got the itch to get back in, and ended up founding a healthcare company that ultimately moved into the patient communication aspect of things. I built that up over the course of time with a lot of the same people that I'm working with now. So our development team and operations team that we have here now was with me on that project. Randomly, the folks that we brought on for that project all had a soccer background. Several of them have played in college. Most of them played in high school. A couple of them had siblings that played professionally. So there was a strong culture of that in the past business that I knew of, but didn't participate in, if you will. We watched the World Cup together, and that was about the extent of it. And then after sold that business in 2019, this project kind of was on the side with one of the guys that was working there, and then he split off and started working on it full time, and then brought me in about 3 years ago as an investor originally while he was developing things out. And then I joined about a little over a year ago, to help him kind of flesh out his vision for where things are, and invested further at that point, and then started running it on a day-to-day basis as well. So that's kind of the history of how we got to this point. Outside of that, in the game itself, about 5 years ago, we invested in a team in Wales that's in the championship division. And a couple of years ago, we bought the majority of that, not through SkillMasters, through a different set of individuals, but myself and a few other guys bought that, as well as invested in DC United, in MLS, and the Coxa, in the Liga ME, and then also bought Inter Bogota. So over the past few years, my life has become completely revolving around the game itself. I spend far more time than I could have ever imagined watching and thinking about soccer and all the things that are wrapped around it. So it's definitely come to a point where what we're doing inside of SkillMasters and Snap has a lot of ramifications to the other businesses I'm involved with as well.
Yeah, that is incredible. And I think of and hearing what you shared here and in our pre-call, that you've been great at seeing where there's opportunity. I mean, opportunity sometimes means something's broken in the existing systems. I'm curious, and I think a lot of people that, athletes, parents, coaches would say, yeah, sometimes the system, there's good things about what's happening. There's definitely a lot of great things happening in sports, but there's a lot of things that are, yeah, could need improvement, and it sometimes takes time. Like, I know, people took forever for NIL to come into existence, and that's, I think most would argue, may not everyone, but most would argue it's a positive ability for an athlete to control their own brand. And so curious, we don't just speak on NIL, but just opportunities you saw, I know things that you've noticed, having been someone who does know sports, maybe not, historically knowing soccer as much, but coming in now and having, seeing what kind of, what did you see, and what are you seeing now that are opportunities or things, whether it's could be some good opportunities or things that are broken that still, are gonna take time to fix.
So to me, it's always, I have to be real careful in my personal thinking a lot of times, because when I see something, it may not necessarily be broken. It may just not work the way I want it to. And so I have to sometimes parse those things a little bit, right? So I look, oh, I can fix that, and it doesn't need fixing. And so I have to look at it. And what we found in this, and what I originally saw, was in most other sports, there's very measurable aspects of things. We were talking about baseball in background. Everything is measured. In football, everything is measured. In basketball, everything is measured. Whereas when I started looking at things in our academy when we were overseas and things of that nature, those things were not measured in the same way inside of soccer, the way that they have been in these other sports. And that left where there were not standards associated with any of the actions, really. So things as simple as speed. If you go to baseball, the 60-yard dash is a standard. So if you say that somebody runs a 6.8, you don't have to define what that is. It's the standard, right? Somebody will know if they're in the game at all. They will know that as somebody runs a 6.8, they're fairly quick, right? Somebody that runs a 6.4 can really fly. Somebody that runs a 7.4 is pretty slow. So those are standards set across. In football, it's the 40. If you talk about the things at the combine, they say, oh, a guy ran a 4.4. Like, everybody knows what that relationship is. In soccer, there's not even a standard for what that length of running is to set what quick is and what's not quick. There hasn't been that standard. And then you take that into things such as passing or agility concepts and all of that. There hasn't been those standards set out that you can understand the underlying skill set of soccer players themselves. So what you get from even the outputs that we get from things like Y Scout, and when we're talking about recruiting of players for professionals, you understand from those what happened. You know the number of passes they completed. You know the number of shots they took. What that doesn't tell you is why things happened the way that they did. Okay. Can a guy or a girl open their hips properly to get through? Are they really good at close ball control? Those types of things, they're so nebulous that there wasn't a way to measure any of that. And so when we look down at it, I wanted to try and find a way to measure those things and set those standards such that we can measure players against each other, and also give those players ways that they can improve those underlying skill sets that will then translate into on-field success. So that's ultimately what we looked down and said, there's nothing that exists here. How do we go build that? And as you mentioned, our background, myself, the team around, our background is in building things. That's what we know how to do. And so that's what we set out to do here, was to build those standards and how to measure that so that we can help players become better players.
That's great. Yeah, and I love it's like a really great mission in how SkillMasters is going to, yeah, give useful information to the athletes, to the coaches and academies and teams. Curious, and I know we didn't talk about it much, but then the bringing in, acquiring Snap, like having. How do you see the relationship between assessment technology, information technology, information service, and an event experience? How do those, yeah, how do they overlap, and how do you view them?
So it's multifaceted in the respect that the easy and simplest ones is that we can run testing events the day before the tournaments. So the people that are traveling to the tournaments can come in, and on Friday evening before the tournaments start, they can come out, they can test, they can get all their metrics. That's the simple one. But when you take that then a step further past that, which is ultimately when you have these metrics, there's two basic things that you can do with them. One is, like we just mentioned, was you can use that then to point out to the players where they need to improve their skill set in order to perform better on the field. Then the second portion of that then is how do outside parties use that information then to judge those players, i.e. colleges. Okay, so college access is in many cases very provincial. I know y'all deal with, like I said, 4,000 college coaches over the course of time. If you look at their rosters, on the boys' side, a lot of times it's foreign and overseas players at this point. But if you look at their players that are U.S. born players, many times it's within a relatively short area away from the college. And so kind of democratizing that whole thing, that somebody from Oklahoma can look down and find a player with the profile that they're looking for in the state of Florida or Alabama that they never would have had access to otherwise. What having the events allows us to do is to take the stats out of the tournaments that we collect. So when we run these tournaments, I didn't get involved with the tournaments, and the team that's here didn't either, to just run a traditional tournament. We do a very good job. Our team is excellent at running the tournament and making sure it goes off well. But on top of that, with all of the stats and everything else that we keep at the tournaments to then populate onto the player's profile, the combination of that with the skills then gives a very comprehensive picture of the player in total for somebody that's looking down to find information about them.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, it's really interesting. I could see, I don't know if this is what you're doing already or headed, but like, yeah, you could even do like team level. I don't know if you do that, like team level comparison type,
Yeah.
aggregate. But that's, yeah, I could see, yeah, it's like you get the data, you're able to different types of indexes. That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, at heart, the tricky part of all of this that we're building is the collection of the data itself. The reality is, with it, the way the world's moving and everything else, once the data is collected, people can manipulate it at will. I mean, the reality is, once the data is in the system, anybody can write code in AI or write code in general that will tell you what that data needs to say. But collection of the data is really hard. I mean, if you think about what it takes to go run these 8 tests, I mean, it's the setup, making sure everything is exact every single time. Because if we run a 20 meter and somebody measures it to 19.5 meters, that data is inaccurate and it's not relevant against the rest of them. So at heart of what we're doing, the collection and organization of that data is the real tricky part of what we do.
Yeah. Oh, that's terrific. I mean, I can imagine you're right. You've got to, because people want trust in the data, and knowing that it's going to be accurate. Yeah. Where do you, when you're thinking about where does data, kind of transition a little bit into the actual use of the data? Because you're talking about the people, the whether it's the coach, someone's the information you directly provide, or someone on their own, a data scientist leveraging it. Where do you think it's most meaningful? How do you anticipate, or how are you using it now, and then how do you anticipate others using it?
Sure. So the raw data itself is honestly you can make it mean whatever you want it to mean. Where it becomes relevant and what you can actually build from it is based on the number of people that we actually test, right? So numbers themselves are all, and this is getting a little bit tech nerd, sorry about that, but it's all kind of relevant. It's a little bit irrelevant. Numbers are just numbers, but it's how they relate to other numbers. So if I tell you that a kid runs like we used the baseball analogy a minute ago, a 6'8", the only reason 6'8's fast is because it's faster than the other kids, right? So all of that has to be taken in as then a relationship to how others are performing at those tests. So when we give the numbers, the raw numbers are okay, but what's really relevant is what percentage is that compared to everybody else. So when we give those numbers out, it's really more of you're faster than 74% of the other kids of your age and gender. That's the really relevant part of the whole process. That only becomes relevant when you have large data sets. If I've only got one team's worth of data, you don't know if that means anything compared to another team's worth of data. So now that we've got 150, 160,000 data points inside of there, we have enough to say that if somebody comes in and runs a certain 20 meters, I can tell you that's really fast compared to everybody else, or that's really slow. And then from there, we can use that data to give each individual kid a path to what they need to work on to then improve those underlying skills.
Yeah, that's great. And I think as you're talking about that it's only relevant as far as, it's comparative. How do you feel? Yeah. And I guess in terms of where coaches or families get it wrong, where the data could be misleading. Is there where, someone's, maybe the number doesn't interpret the way it could or should be. Do you see that where it's, how much where the data might not be as meaningful as someone might want to place place power on it?
So it's and we tell this to coaches all the time, because when we talk to coaches, you get I know what a good player looks like, that kind of thing all the time. And what we always say is, look, this is a tool in the toolbox. It's not the only tool that exists, right? So this is a way to help identify the physical and technical capabilities of a player. It cannot tell you if they move into space properly. It cannot tell you if they're scanning the field very well, any of those sorts of things. That's not what this is. What I can tell you is whether this player can recover if they're caught off. I can tell you if they're going to get to 50-50 balls. I can tell you if you can play a high line because that player can't recover fast enough. I can tell you whether they can flip their hips open to receive a pass with their back to a defender and get around them because they're very agile. I can tell you those. I cannot tell you if they know that guy is on a run down this way and have the ability to see that in the middle of play. So it's a tool in the toolbox. It's not a definitive, this player is the best player. It is, of the technical and physical capabilities, this player possesses the ability to do that. And that's where we have to take the combination of that and the on-the-field scouting to make sure that the best technical and physical player then has those specific skills that turn them into a great player.
Yeah, I love that. You're right. I agree. I agree with you. I'm like, coaches often sit, I've really seen it with the story of Moneyball, where it's, the scouts do offer value. There's always the eye does tell you something, and there's just things right now that you can't get perfectly from data. I'm curious, in the data though, are there things from a development perspective, different areas that, actually there's a professor we used to work with, and he says, I can't teach a player to be taller. And so there's like, well, yeah, in all sports, probably almost all height matters, especially like basketball, that matters a lot. But I'm wondering, and that is an important attribute to a measure to collect. But are there attributes where you're like, it's more of a development base where you can improve it, or it's probably going to be fairly static? How do you think about that range and maybe the feedback that you'd give to the family versus the feedback you'd give to a coach on it?
So we split everybody up by position and positional groups when we're doing these comparisons when they get towards high school. We don't really do that as much when they're younger because kids move all over the place and it's just really not relevant. But individual positions, what we're talking to a center back about and looking for inside their profile is very different than what you're looking for in a winger. Right. So when we're talking to those folks and you're looking at that, you're being very specific to their position, and then you're working within what that looks like for them. So, when you're building these conversations with the parents and the player for that matter, is you're trying to say, okay, look, you need to focus on this skill set. Like as a winger, a baseline of speed is required. If you're a midfielder, a baseline of agility is required. So those are the things then that you kind of focus the testing on, and not just the testing, but you focus then their improvable skills in that. So the interesting thing that we have found is you're not going to create an elite athlete with any of this. What you can do is improve the player to be the best player they can be with that. Right. So the people that end up playing professionally, even at the lower leagues professionally, there is a baseline of athleticism and everything else that's simply required. That no matter how much you spend time on it, no matter that there's a requirement in there. What we're working to do is to make sure that every player can reach the best that they want to be. All right. So, as you well know, it takes a level of dedication to want to be better at something. And we can help guide that once they say, hey, look, I may never be a professional, but I'd really like to play in high school. I'd really like to play in college. Here's the path for you to be able to do that. And that's what we kind of help with, is giving them that direction of here's these baselines and here's what you have to work on for that.
And that's great. The athletes, the ones that are willing. There's two more questions. One's on. We were talking about this before we started chatting here, but you know the type of people, or the people who are most open to this. I don't know, maybe I don't know if growth mindset's the right term, but people who understand the importance of data, of development, of using it as a tool, and then people who might be, I don't want to say old school, maybe more, yeah, just have an approach that they believe, it ain't broke, don't, they think it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'm curious if you see any of that in conversations you have with coaches or leagues, teams, parents, etc. I've seen it. So I'm curious, yeah, how you approach the naysayers versus those who are kind of open to getting better, to making it the world of youth sports, a better place. But curious your take on that, because it's definitely Well, I feel like I've felt it quite a bit. I'm curious, if you're experiencing it at all.
We definitely run into those that are not as open to discussions, that believe that they know what a soccer player looks like when they see it, and have done things the way they have done them, and want to continue to do that tomorrow and the following day as well. We definitely have those conversations very regularly. That being said, we also have conversations with people who have been naysayers in the past, and then the light comes on and they see the value of having that as part of it. So, you have very different conversations with, whether it's parents or one thing. So in most cases, parents are looking for any way they can find to improve their kid. If there's a tool out there that will allow them their child to become a better player, to enjoy the game more, to be on a better team, whatever that sort of looks like, they're generally very receptive to that. When you get into the coaches themselves, a lot of them have done things the way they do, and whatever level of success they've had. Some of them are more open than others. And then when you get up into the directors and things of that nature, again, you have those that are more receptive than others. But in general, if we can show them how this benefits them, their club, how it makes their players better, then we can have a constructive conversation around that. And a lot of times they use these things to have those conversations with their parents. Club directors and coaches deal with a lot with their parents, to say the least. It's one of the things, the parents always on their kid's side, which they should be. But this underlying data can also help guide those conversations between the club and the parent, to let them kind of know where they fit in the universe of things within their club. And then it helps to have a more constructive conversation, so you don't have that subjective, you just don't like my kid, whatever. It's okay. let's look, little Johnny is the 15th fastest player on his team. And then it's a more evidence-based conversation, and it turns it out of that you don't like my kid into a here's how we can help little Johnny get better, and then he'll have more opportunities. So once we get into those conversations, then it kind of changes the scope of what we're discussing with those directors and coaches and everything else as well.
Yeah, I could see that it improves the direction. And I keep thinking and wondering about what the future will look like. And I'm sure you doing it now. It feels like kind of the future is here. I know you're talking about with AI, people can take data. My kind of final question, for someone who's been able to, I don't know, prognosticate, being able to spot inefficiencies in markets and see what's ahead. What you think the future of youth sport, if it's just for SkillMasters or Snap and beyond, but like what do you, when you're thinking of where we might be in 5 years, I just feel like forever away because given how fast everything's evolving, but where do you see athlete development and assessment looking like, versus where it is today? Will there be things, or is it here right now, or will do you think there's going to be anything different that even SkillMasters might be doing in 5 years?
I think there's constant involvement. I think everything's always evolving when it comes to this. If we went back 5 years, I think you'd find some things that you do today that you just kind of take for granted that weren't a thing back then. And I think in 5 years going forward, I can't see the future, but I can see what I believe personally is that you're going to continue to use more information to make better decisions. And I think that's always the case, not just in youth sports, but across the board. But in youth sports, I think particularly looking at soccer is the more information we have and know, the better off the kids are ultimately going to be. Because ultimately, this is about giving them their best path, right? And the odds of kids playing professional soccer or any other sport are minimal. But how do they have the most fun? How do they progress so that they get out of it what they want? And I think the more that we have that we can provide to them from a data perspective, the better they're going to be. And not just data, but it also then gives them more opportunities to play in whatever the higher level is that they're looking for. And any of those things we can do to further that are just to their benefit.
Yeah, no, I could see. And I want to, thank you for your time, Keith. I mean, I really appreciate the conversation. I've enjoyed like hearing your perspective on how better assessment and, getting this more clear performance data has, and will shape athlete development. I love how you're doing it at your events and making this, in this impactful way that, timing wise, you found a solution that isn't just, purely additive. You're finding a way to layer it into existing ecosystems, which is, tournaments and the experience of youth teams. So want to thank you, and thank you for your time here, sharing your insights with our audience. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.